Welcome to No Gimmick Radio. Now here's your hosts, Trace and J-Rod. Friday, May 20th, 2011. Want to thank you for checking out the inaugural episode of what I believe to be the quintessential internet wrestling radio program. Of course, we're talking about No Gimmick Radio. Trace, say hi to the lovely folks at home.
Hello, lovely folks at home.
We are mourning the loss of one of wrestling's legends, one of the greats of all time. I'm sure you've already heard, of course, we're talking about Randy Macho Man Savage.
Yeah, absolutely, J-Rod. Macho Man Randy Savage, earlier this morning, he was found dead after a car wreck. There's no official report of what caused the death, but we do know that he had a heart attack while driving his vehicle. His wife was in the Jeep as well. And she got out with minor injuries after he wrecked into a tree. Unfortunately, he did not make it, and we lost one of the greats today.
Truly sad. A guy that you can definitely put in your top five of all time in terms of what he could do in the ring, in terms of championships won, in terms of all-time matches, and a guy that will truly be missed. We've got tons of Savage stuff for you today, tons of memories. We're going to be looking back at a lot of high points in his career. And right now, we're going to take you to a clip. One of his most famous interviews for one of the greatest wrestling matches of all time.
Definitely.
Oh, yeah. Macho Man Randy Savage, Intercontinental Heavyweight Champion, was in a state of shock when Ricky the Dragon Steamboat came back, yeah. But this time, in front of the largest audience in the world, I will not only embarrass you, not only pin you with the 1, 2, 3 count, but I'm going to put you out of wrestling for good. Oh, yeah, Dragon, I am the Lord and Master of the Ring, and you're going to find that out, one athlete to another, right now. You can't be with me, no. History beckons the Macho Man, yeah.
Of course, you recognize that sound clip. That was WrestleMania 3, the night that Randy Savage went on to have what stood as probably the pinnacle for WrestleMania matches for at least 10 years, at least until Bret Hart and Steve Austin tore it up at WrestleMania 13. One of the greatest matches of all time, even in a losing effort. The Macho Man Randy Savage really became part of the mainstream, and he really put himself on the map. What we're going to take a look at now, obviously, the accomplishments of Randy Savage. I mean, there's numerous. Before the King of the Ring was even on TV, he won 2 of those. But also, he's a 2-time WWF World Champion, or WWE if you're, younger than 13. You're not sure what WWF is. He's a 4-time WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Won his first WCW World Heavyweight Champion at World War III in 1995. Of course, everyone remembers that was the big 60-man battle royal where they set up the 3 rings and it was just a big schmoz. He won that in a pretty impressive fashion. Also, we're talking about 1987 Match of the Year from PWI. Obviously, everyone knows what match we're talking about, WrestleMania 3 against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. And in 1992, peaked at number 2 on the PWI 500, which is no small feat, no matter who you are.
Well, and what's really interesting is a lot of fans, longtime fans of Randy Savage, would probably say that 92 may not have even been his best year. A lot of people are going to remember the mid-'80s to the late '80s when he was feuding with the Ted DiBiase's and the Hulk Hogan, especially the Mega Power storyline, which to this day still stands as one of the most well-booked storylines of all time. It went from WrestleMania 4 to WrestleMania 5, and it really redefined what long-term story planning is. And I remember as a kid watching that, and I was extremely young. I watched them on VHS tapes. And to this day, it still blows my mind that they were able to do that.
Absolutely. SummerSlam 1988 is a show that's very near and dear to my heart. Actually, the very first WWF pay-per-view I ever saw. And Randy Savage was 1/4 of the main event on that show. Obviously, the Mega Powers versus the Mega Bucks. It was an unbelievable event. It was definitely, you hear Gorilla Monsoon say it all the time. It's a happening. And it for sure was. It was a super show. It was one of those nights that you don't ever forget. And it was after that night that I became instantly hooked. I was a pro wrestling fan for life after that night.
Well, and you're not the only one who felt inspired and was hooked on it by Macho Man Randy Savage. You look at a lot of the top heels today, and you're going to see the likes of Chris Jericho and CM Punk and Edge. All of them got a lot of inspiration from Macho Man Randy Savage. CM Punk on Twitter today was really tore up about it. Macho Man Randy Savage was one of those guys who he wasn't just in the wrestling bubble. He was mainstream. He was in the Spider-Man movies. He had the very popular Slim Jim commercials. The man really transcended wrestling before that was even a possibility. He was never the likes of Hulk Hogan, but at the same time, he was still up there with the mainstream. People knew who he was.
Absolutely, and if you look at his in-ring style when he first came into the WWF, you could just tell he was a few steps ahead of everybody. He was on a different page than everyone else. He kind of knew what wrestling was going to become. He knew that he needed, being a smaller guy, it was never an obstacle for him because his style lent you to believe that he would fight anyone tooth and nail no matter who it was. But at the same time, he had a very good finesse style where he could use his speed, he could use his agility, he could use his high-flying ability to really put himself over and really put himself on the map and show someone that, hey, when Randy Savage comes down to the ring, you're going to see something special, you're going to see something different, and you're going to see something you never saw before. And he always brought that to every match, no matter if he wrestled Dusty Rhodes, if you wrestled Jake Roberts, if you wrestled Hulk Hogan. I mean, you could run down the list of guys who he got their best match out of, and I'm thinking about the Honky Tonk Man, I'm thinking about Jake Roberts, I mean, the Ultimate Warrior. You could make the argument that Rick Rude got the Ultimate Warrior's best match, but I would make the argument that even though the audience was smaller in the early 90s, as opposed to the late 80s when Rick Rude wrestled the Ultimate Warrior, I would honestly argue that Randy Savage got the Ultimate Warrior's best match, and not that he had a bunch that you wanted to write home about, but the match with Randy Savage that he had, the series of matches that they had in 91 to 92, those were some great matches that I look back on, and it just reminds you of being a kid again. And when I think about Randy Savage, I just think about the past, and I think about what was so great, and when wrestling just exploded onto the scene, and it was so huge.
Well, and you talk about his series of matches with the Ultimate Warrior and how they were so great. With the Ultimate Warrior, you're really limited in what you could do, and one of the great things that Randy Savage was capable of was telling a story. He had great psychology behind everything he did, and I remember being, 6, 7 years old watching the old VHSs of, their matches, and always being amazed, even at that time, of the story that they told, the emotion in it. I mean, when Savage, or when they were, doing their career match, that I'd never been hooked into a match quite like that. I'd seen Hogan Andre, I'd seen every WrestleMania up to that point, but there was something about that match that hooked me in, more so than almost any other match I'd seen up to that point. And it's not because Ultimate Warrior is what I would call a great storyteller, it's because Macho Man Randy Savage knew what he was doing in that ring.
And the Macho Man could work with anyone. I mean, Hulk Hogan, especially, it comes to mind as well, a guy who had unbelievable charisma. I mean, I don't need to explain how great Hulk Hogan was at what he could do, but when it came down to a technical wrestling style, I've heard so many people say it, he didn't know a wrist lock from a wristwatch, and if you ask Vern Gagne, he'll tell you the same thing. Hulk Hogan just didn't have the wrestling down like you would think a multiple-time world champion did, but Savage was able to work a very psychological match. He worked from underneath like a smaller guy should. He worked it incredibly well, and their match at WrestleMania 5 stands to me as one of the best matches that I've seen, and in large part due to the effort that Randy Savage put forth that night.
Oh, yeah, I mean, definitely. Randy Savage, Hogan, to his credit, had his work boots on, but Randy Savage, you could tell, had a lot to do with the input of that match. And, going back to how great of a storyteller he was, and, like I said earlier, the Mega Power story was absolutely amazing, but what made Randy Savage so great was that he seemed not necessarily over the top, but just so out there that if anyone else did it, it would be hard to buy. It'd be hard to believe that somebody could be this crazy and still a sane member of society. But when you saw Randy Savage come out, when you saw his mannerisms, be it a face or heel, when he came out to that ring, there was something different about him. There was something that made you believe whatever it was he was doing, whether he was a face, whether he was a heel, if he needed sympathy. You always believed and bought into what he was doing, and I think that's one of the true signs of a great superstar.
Couldn't have said it any better myself. What we're going to go into now is a clip of the Macho Man from about 1997 during his feud with Diamond Dallas Page, considered one of few of the only good things WCW ever really did after the NWO became, 75% of their roster. So here's a clip, the Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth talking about Diamond Dallas Page.
The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
NWO for life. It's got a tongue lashing. The madness is something which the Macho Man was trying to keep inside. I am the madness. But now the situation has totally escalated where the madness is totally out of control. Say that again 3 times. Did anybody hear what I was talking about? I like it. Hey, take one. between you and me, Diamond Dallas Page. The way I see it is that you and I are on the road to disaster, right?
That's right.
That's right, written. Diamond Dallas Page, DDP. I am your master! I didn't know your name before, but I know it now. The fact is, you're in my world, and Kimberly's gonna witness the fact that her husband can't handle the Macho Man Randy Savage. Kimberly's been dreaming about the Macho Man Randy Savage. But that just shows she's got class with a capital K.
I don't think so.
She would like to, but you gotta understand the fact that I am the Macho Man Randy Savage. Your man is not the man that you thought that he was. So, the next time you meet me, DDP, you're gonna realize that you never should have knocked on the madness's door, because I am your worst nightmare. I like the way you said it. You feel it? You gotta understand something. You don't wanna be, you and Kimberly both. I don't know what your problems are. NWO for life. It doesn't get any stronger than the Macho Man. Dig it? Yeah.
The preceding announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the Macho Man, Miss Elizabeth, talking about DDP. Right now, we're going to get into a segment that we call the Weekly Top 10. It's something we're going to do on every show. Obviously, this week's Top 10 is focusing on Randy Savage and 10 of his best moments in professional wrestling. Number 10, we're going to count backwards because, that's the classic way to do a Top 10, wouldn't you agree?
And we're well educated, so yes.
10 to 1. Here we go. Number 10, WrestleMania 10, Falls Count Anywhere versus Crush. In my opinion, we have already talked about this, an incredibly underrated match.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. It was, when you look at 1994 WWF, there wasn't a whole lot as far as the type of action you saw in that match happening. I mean, they brawled all over the arena, and, it may have been standard fare for some of the other promotions, but for WWF at the time, it was pretty revolutionary, and I think it gets overlooked a lot nowadays, and it's a shame.
Yeah, a good match that saw Crush tied up at the end with the whole pulley and rope system. It was something to see for sure. If you haven't checked that out, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. WrestleMania 8, checking in at number 9, the WWE title win against Ric Flair. Obviously WWF at the point, but Ric Flair was the champion. They had the whole storyline going in where Ric Flair was trying to woo Elizabeth, and they worked a solid match. Probably not one of the best matches they would have. I know they went on to WCW and had actually a lot better matches, but still a classic. The one thing I remember about that, I hadn't been exposed to a lot of Ric Flair at the time, and he wore the Crimson Mask, but he wore it in that shiny blonde hair, and his hair turned red. It looked like Bozo.
Well, and this is another situation, and you saw this a lot in WWF where Randy Savage, the wrestling there wasn't, he wasn't allowed to go full tilt. So he had to use a lot of the storyline, and the storyline to the Ric Flair Savage build for WrestleMania was spectacular. The potential reveal of Elizabeth's pictures. I remember as a little kid hoping it was going to happen because when you're 7 years old, Miss Elizabeth.
Who didn't want to see Elizabeth naked?
Yeah, exactly. So I was shooting for.
All due respect, she's passed on since.
Yes, but
she was a beautiful lady.
But and it played off to Randy Savage's real life jealousy issues too, and I think that made it for a much more intense storyline. And I wouldn't say it's underrated, but it's up there. And I think as far as Ric Flair's best matches, as far as just storytelling, I think it does get ignored.
Absolutely. Number 8, WrestleMania 5, when the Mega Powers implode. Randy Savage against Hogan, again another match we've already talked about. Very underrated in terms of the best WrestleMania matches. Probably not one that you put in a top 10, but still a great match nonetheless. And again, I'll say Randy Savage got Hulk Hogan's best match.
Oh yeah, I mean definitely. Like I said earlier, Hogan put his working boots on, but it was Savage who carried that, and they had a great showing.
Number 7, February 24th, 1986, at the Boston Garden, Randy Savage begins one of probably the most historic Intercontinental title runs of all time, where he beats Tito Santana for the IC Championship. It was a great match. Saw Savage win with a foreign object, but by hook or by crook, he became one of the best Intercontinental champions of all time. For my money, a top 3 between him, Bret Hart, and Kurt Hennig. You could rank any of those guys 1, 2, and 3, and you'd have my top 3.
Well,